Hey everyone, in this video we are going to be editing raw images in Photoshop. So if you shoot photos with a DSLR camera or a mirrorless camera or even some point and shoot cameras, you can shoot them in raw format. And raw versus JPEG is an uncompressed type of file that looks more flat in terms of contrast. So flat, when I say flat, that means the blacks aren't as black. And you can see here on the left, this is the unedited version of the raw photo. This is what I got from my camera, and this is what we're going to be turning it into on the right. Now, the raw image, that could look like a cool style for some sorts of things if you want to overlay it with text or quotes and things like that. But this one on the right, this would be better for some lighter text, for a quote, and it just looks more striking to me. But it's just amazing that the camera, when you shoot it raw like this, can turn it into something like this. We're going to be learning how to edit JPEG images later, but one thing to note is that with raw images, you have more ability to edit things. So things like this, that even though it seems very light and bright, you can make it look like this because it's a raw image. There's more data in there being captured, and the file size is bigger. If this was shot in JPEG and looked like this, I wouldn't be able to edit it to look like this because there's not as much data to bring down the colors to make it darker. It wouldn't look as good. So anyways, how do we edit photos in Photoshop? Go to your Finder or your Documents and find the photo that you want to edit. And you can, again, use this one, which is in the resources of this course. Go to Open, right-click it, and then Open with Photoshop. So open it with whatever Photoshop version you have. And if you open a raw image in Photoshop, this is what will pop up. A little module. It's the Camera Raw Editor. And this has lots of cool things that you can do, but the main things are in this first tab on the right hand side. You can see multiple tabs up here, and we'll go through a few of these options, but the main ones are right here. Now, the first thing that I do when I edit images is doing exposure and contrast and saturation, and that's what we'll be doing on this tab right here. So with exposure, I can just take this and drop it down to the left, and you can already see that it's starting to look a lot better. The exposure is more correct. The leaf looks good. The background is dark. And then the contrast is also off for raw images because the contrast is basically, think of it as how dark your darks are and how bright your brights are. If we crank up this contrast, you can see that the darks get darker. See up here in the top left, the darks get darker and the brights get brighter. If I go to the left, everything becomes a little bit more muted. Now, a uncontrasted, a decontrasted image, those are kind of popular nowadays. You see this with a lot of filters on Instagram, but in general, I like to boost the contrast. And you can boost the contrast by just using this bar or individually adjusting the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. So for example, if I take the blacks down, that's just adjusting the blacks, the very dark parts of this image, or I could increase those. But if I decrease those and I, for example, increase the whites, that's adding contrast because it's making the blacks darker and the whites brighter. Below that, you have clarity, vibrance, and saturation. Clarity will sharpen the edges of things. So if things are slightly out of focus, you can increase the clarity, especially for nature shots or landscapes. This is a nice thing to do, big, wide photos. It's good to add a little bit of clarity, but if you go crazy with it, it gets this weird sort of HDR effect that I don't like. And so I usually only boost it just between like 5 and 15. Saturation and vibrance. So with saturation, you're going to be boosting the colors of everything in the image. So if you want to make it super colorful, you can boost it up that way. If you want to make it a black and white image, you can bring the saturation down to -100. I typically will boost it just a little bit because, again, the raw images come out of the camera a little bit unsaturated. Vibrance is a smart way to add saturation to your photo. What vibrance does, it adds a lot of color to the greens and the blues in your image, but not as much to the yellows and the reds. And this is good for when you have photos of people, because our skin tones have a lot of reds, yellows in them. And if you add saturation, our skin might start to look a little funny. But you would rather use vibrance, because then it would increase the saturation of everything around us, the blue skies, the green backdrops, but not our skin. And so for this image though, there's already a lot of color, and I'm not going to mess with that too much. Maybe just boost it just a little bit. Up here, I passed over temperature and tint. So the temperature is the coolness or the warmth of your photo. Right now, this photo is very warm, and that's how it was naturally shot. But I can change this and make it either more warm, adding yellows to it, or less warm. And making it a little less makes it feel a little bit more natural, makes it look a little bit more how it would if you were seeing it in person. The tint, this adds magenta or greens to it. So if you do take a photo that has a little bit too much green in it or a little bit too much reddish purple, you can adjust this as well. So then you have these other tabs. You have your tone curve, which you can also use to edit the contrast of things with these sliders down here. And you typically would want to either use the tone curve or the sliders in this first basic tab. So since I've already done it here, I'm not going to mess with the tone curve. Over here, you have your detail. So it adds a little bit of sharpening already, but you can boost this a little bit because typically your raw photos do need a little bit of sharpening. Noise reduction, if you're shooting with a very high ISO and a darker image, you can add that. So let me just zoom in here. I was shooting with a pretty low ISO in this image, but you can see a little bit of grain in here. If I add like 25 noise reduction, it gets rid of a little bit of that grain. If I increase this a little bit more, you can see it even better. So up to 78, that grain starts to go away. So let me zoom in even more so you can see that a little bit more detail from 0 to 76. Now this is okay to do for a lot of images, especially raw images, but when you get into photos of people, this might look a little wonky as well. Okay, so that's the sharpening detail. And I'm just going to jump over to this effects tab because post-crop vignetting is probably the one thing you're interested in. So if this amount I increase or decrease, you can see that it's adding or decreasing, adding or taking away a vignette. So if you go to the right, you add this light vignette, to the left, a dark vignette. And then once you add the amount, you can change the midpoint, which makes it bigger or smaller, the roundness, which makes it more of a circle or a square, the feathering, which fades the vignette more or less, and then the highlights, which allows the highlights of your image to come through the vignette itself. If you're happy with this and you have done all of your edits, you can click Open Image. There's one more thing I'll mention, the crop tool up here. So if you click this crop tool, what you can do is just start to click and drag in your image. And now it gives you this little box. And when you're done, you can press Return on your keyboard. I'm going to undo that. When you click this crop tool again and just make it the full size of the image, press Return as well. If you hold down this crop tool up here, it gives you specific sizes. So for example, if you're creating an image for Instagram and you want it to be 1x1 square, you can choose that 1x1, and now it gives you a perfect square to work with. So say we're creating this leaf photo for Instagram, I can choose that, press Return, and now after I'm done editing, click Open Image. And now I have this image, and all I want to do is save it now. So to save, I can go to File, Save As, choose JPEG from your format, which is great for uploading online, name it, and then save it. So I'll save this as leaf square. So I know this is the square image of the leaf. Press OK. Change the image options to maximum if you want to have a maximum file, or you can make it a little bit lower if you need the file size to be lower. So something like high of quality 8. That might be better for posting online. Click OK. And there you have it. It's going to be in our Finder. Let's find our leaf square image. That's a very beautiful image, much different than the raw image that we took out of the camera. So that's how you edit raw images in Photoshop to make them look better. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll see you in another lesson. Bye.